It's weird how no matter how unusual something is, we start to become used to it. It's December of 2019. I made contact with something in my dreams. Or more precisely, it found me. I know, dreams are weird, but I want to describe what it's like for me. We all know the internal voice in our head, which is basically us, but through the lens of our hope or fears. It's always us. We can control it. Now, imagine that in a dream, but it's a sentient something that has its own will, thought process, rules of engagement, morality, etc., and shows me things I could never in a million years imagine to dream. Most of our dreams are somewhat familiar fractures of fear, love, past events, but all in weird jumbled patterns in which the meaning we assign them is usually far off from the visual we have. Every once in a while, I connect with this thing, and it shows me things. I don't know if it's their dream, or if they're able to show me something, but the quality changes. I'm not seeing it with my mind's eye. It's like instead being shown directly to me, and in a quality that I can absolutely remember every detail right after. To put it plainly, these aren't my dreams. It's almost like the dream is a platform to try and communicate, and they seem to have the ability to craft a story that my mind starts to visualize, and then they correct it. The first few times I brushed it off to nightmares or stress or something, but it happened with enough frequency and repetition that I just accept that once in a while I'll have some sort of shared vision with some sort of entity. Recently, I've had the idea that if I can master lucid dreaming, or try to be conscious when this happens, I can 1. Control the dream better, and 2. Actually communicate. After months of trying and failing and waking up with a "God damn it, I was so close," I finally had my first piece of progress. Last night, it was telling me a story of my past. A few years ago, when I moved back to my college town, I reconnected with an old friend who I had a falling out with. Let's call her Jane. It reminded me that Jane and I reconnected, and that Jane had a horrible car accident, and that I was trying to be there for. I can remember the strangeness of this so vividly, even the way they were describing car accidents in college towns. It was like someone who only had a vague notion of what these things were. The roads were impossibly large and didn't follow lines. The college was small, as in almost laughably funny huts. It then showed me somewhat graphic pictures that I was exchanging with someone while planning a threesome. We'll call him Eddie. I hooked up with him ages ago. Never did a threesome though. Wouldn't turn it down. And then a thought bloomed. It was a tiny, tiny seed amongst a field of grass. We didn't move back to our college town. I literally felt my self-conscious reject the notion that this was our experience. The thing was just as confused as I was. There was almost a dispute, and I could feel the seed connecting the dots. Wait, we haven't seen Jane in more than a decade. We never lived in that town again. And then I felt it. The tiniest fraction of a second where I was conscious in this dream, and just like that, it all fell apart. And I felt elation before the connection was broken. I'm not at risk taken normally, and a part of me wonders about the risks involved of being conscious during a dream, in which something is trying to connect with me. I've noticed it has a penchant for dark and macabre topics. The focus on this was Jane's accident as an example. Yet another part of me is very fascinated by all of this. The first occurrence was about a month ago, I assume. I looked down and noticed a bruise in the shape of a bite mark on my inner leg. A few weeks have passed, and my family and I forget about the mark, like it never happened to begin with. That's till my dad shows me 2 bite marks on his wrist, and I remember about the one I had on my leg, that's long gone by now. We all just laughed it off, joking about it being a ghost. Today, while working, I noticed that my upper arm, more toward the armpit, had felt a little bit sore, and that's when I noticed a bruise in the shape of a bite, though it was only under the jaw that could be seen. I'm starting to really worry about this, wondering if there could be something that could potentially haunt my family. The latest death of the family was a family friend's daughter who was like a little sister to me. My dad was explaining that the marks almost looked small enough to be a child, but I can't imagine her presence known to us in this kind of manner. The night of her passing left a pretty hard weight on me, like how any death would. We all knew that it was coming. It was a waiting game, just about. I could hardly sleep that night because I had in my head that I wanted to be right there with her in that hospital room, holding her tiny hand in mine when she passed. But it was becoming so late that my family had to go home. All night I kept tossing and turning, expecting that if I opened my eyes, then I'd see her and I'd say goodbye. The last toss of the night left a huge scare. I couldn't move, couldn't scream for anyone. I was missing her goodbye and I just knew it. That was the first and only night I had sleep paralysis, and I hope to God I never have that happen again. So the final question is, where are these bites coming from? Is it my family friend's daughter just messing with us, or could it be something much more alarming? My other assumption is that it has to do with the shows my mother and I have been watching. I've been coming up with the idea that maybe hauntings are more of the negative energies that are built up in a place. Basically, what is brought up in is it stays kind of thing. I know that low vibrational beings feed off of fear and negativity. So could the binding of paranormal shows and scary movies be what is bringing these strange occurrences? I gotta get this off my chest. For context, it was probably after 2 a.m. I was on a WhatsApp call with my girlfriend. We were talking normally. Soon, her voice cut off from the call, and I started hearing a child. I assume a little boy. He was talking, more like babbling like babies do. My girlfriend has a younger brother. He's 13, so it couldn't have been him. She didn't have any family in her room with her. This was quite odd because it sounded like whatever it was pretty close to the mic. I said, "Jess, who's that?" "Jess?" Then, as suddenly as it started, it ended, and an eerie silence took over the call. "Jess?" I asked again. Jess responded, "What?" I asked her, "Are you alone?" She said, "Yeah, why?" I just told her, "Nothing, just curious." I left it at that. A couple of months passed and the strange interference happened again. I'm sure it happened after 12 a.m. This time, the call with my girlfriend got interrupted and a really static conversation between two ladies came through. It was too staticky, I could just make out a couple of words. I said, "Excuse me?" like at least 5 times, and "Hello?" I got no response or reaction. When silence filled the call once more, I called out for my girlfriend and asked her, "Did you hear that?" She said, "No. What did you hear?" I told her what I heard and she just stayed silent. I calmed her down by saying, maybe someone tapped into our call or my phone intercepted another call. I'm not sure what it was. Trying to reason it made me more uneasy. Thinking about a thing tapping into our call was creepy. Imagining that it was a creep hacking my cell phone connection actually was worse. Some months later, it happened again. This time it was worse. It happened during the early hours of the morning. The call got interrupted, and I heard on the other end this chilling, high-pitched and fast laughter. It slowed down and lowered the pitch until it was the deepest laugh I've ever heard. It shook me to my core. The laughter stopped and it started crying hysterically, and after a few seconds of wailing, it stopped. I immediately told my girlfriend she got really scared this time. I told her to forget it and go to bed. I will never forget about these 3 incidents. It still freaks me out. I fear calling my girlfriend because of the interference. I want to preface this by saying that my youngest sister, 15, is more sensitive to spirits and frequently sees shadow figures and strange lights in our house. Others have also seen things, while I've only seen a strange light once, and I've heard strange noises probably 5 times. I am a believer in the paranormal, but I also try to find reasonable explanations to strange things that happen before claiming it's ghosts. But this one was just strange and aligns with other experiences. A few months ago, I had a dream that some would consider a nightmare. In my dream, I was in bed and had woken up in the middle of the night. I tried to go back to sleep, but when I tried to move, I realized I couldn't dream. So I had sleep paralysis, but I was completely fine. In my dream, I was trying to call my sister, but I could barely talk. Finally, I was able to turn my head to the side towards the door. There was a chair next to my bed, and a tall black figure of a guy was sitting there. He might have been wearing a hat. When he saw me turn, he looked at me, and instead of eyes, he had small, glowing green orbs. Super bright, almost neon green. I woke up right as he looked at me. I brushed it off as a weird dream and went back to sleep. This is when the story gets weird. In the morning, I was telling my sister about the weird dream I had, because I rarely remember my dreams, and I don't get nightmares, and that was the closest thing to a nightmare I've had since I was like 8. I'm 26 now. As I was beginning to explain the eyes of the shadow man, she cuts me off and starts describing them exactly how they looked. She then explains that she went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and she says she saw a small, maybe 1.5-foot elk-like figure with the same glowing green eyes. We were both super weirded out, and we went to tell my brother. This is when it gets even weirder. He was super nonchalant about it, and when we finished he was like, "Oh yeah, I've seen it." He explained that it was during a sleep paralysis episode where a small elf-like shadow with the same glowing green eyes was banging on our heater. I remember him telling us about his sleep paralysis episode a few years ago when it happened, but I never thought it was anything paranormal, just a weird dream. At the time, he hadn't mentioned the glowing green eyes. The whole thing was extremely weird, and I can't really explain it. I started working at a childcare centre about 6 months ago. I love my job and the people that I work with, so much so that when my co-workers first told me about Beverly, I didn't really think much of it. Beverly is a name that my co-workers got off a spirit box when working late after closing one night. Obviously, we have no idea who is haunting the centre, but Beverly has become the name we've adopted. My boss, the director of the centre, now refuses to stay late because of the things that happen while alone there. Some of the normal occurrences are the motion-controlled paper towel dispensers dispensing when no one is around. Laughter is heard in certain rooms, doors closing at random, and voices coming from the bathrooms when no one is in there. Every classroom has 2 bathrooms for boys and girls, normal for a childcare centre. One specific preschool room with a teacher that's been there for more than 12 years has shared stories of a child's voice calling from the bathroom requesting for help, only for her to open the door and no child be in the bathroom. One occurrence was when she was teaching circle time and every child was sitting on the carpet when a child's voice called from the bathrooms, "Miss M, I need help." She counted her kids, got up, no one was in the bathroom. The voices coming from the bathroom had died down when I had come to the centre, but she had even heard voices down the hallway in co-workers' voices, only for there to be no one there. The reason for this background is because the voice from the bathroom happened to me. Nothing paranormal has ever happened to me, even though the topic of ghosts and spirits fascinates me. A friend in high school who I would call a medium once told me that I had a unique aura, and that some spirits like that. Now, maybe that's just me grasping for something about me to be special. But God, I hope Beverly hasn't taken an interest in me. After nap, all the kids sit at the tables and wake up with their stuffed animals, while the teachers put away the cots. I'm doing my thing, bringing cots to the supply closet, when a little girl, who I'll call W, calls from the bathroom. I walk over, and she complains that she can't wipe herself. I tell her to do it herself and close the door. She whines, but since it's summertime and close to the lower preschool classes aging up to the old classes, we weren't allowed to wipe them anymore. I sort of forget about her, thinking she's figured it out, and it's been about 3 to 4 minutes and she hasn't come out yet that I can see. I'm doing damage control, trying to keep certain kids from throwing things and the like. I return to putting cots away when I hear the same little girl, in W's voice, call from the bathroom, "Miss Sarah, I need help." I think, damn, this kid doesn't quit. She's trying to have me wipe her. I finish putting the cots away, intercept a child running around the room, and then when going for another set of cots, I realise that she had called and walked over to the bathroom, prepared to tell her once again to do it herself. I open the door and the lights are off, and no one is there. I look over the sinks, expecting to see her washing her hands, having figured it out. But no. The sinks are abandoned. That's when I look at the tables and find her sitting at the table, hands washed, holding her stuffed animal. I even walk over to be sure, touch her hands that are damp and ask, "Did you wash your hands?" She nods, obviously still pissed at me that I made her wipe herself. So, I don't know. What's the paranormal experience? My boss was curious to see if we could hear it on camera, since a few years back they were able to hear Phantom laughing from another room. It's sort of freaky to think that something can mimic the kids' voices, and my co-workers' voices have me not think anything of it. It's also creepy to think about what exactly haunts the halls of my workplace and what I've gotten myself into. When I was 12 years old, I went to an outdoor school camp for 3 days. Practically, our whole grade was there. It was Camp Chief Hector. I still remember my counselor's name was Coda. I had lots of fun there, but I got extremely scared when it came to night time. My room was located at the very end of the hall inside the cabin, right next to the emergency exit doors. It was me and my friend, along with two people we didn't like inside that room. On my first night, I had horrible vibes from the room, and it was so strange. 2 bunk beds and 1 window. A little square room, and it just had a horrible presence. I made it through one night, and the rest of the day was fine. My second night was worse, and I began thinking something was outside our window, without any proof. After the second night, me and everyone in my room had bad vibes, and my friends in the next door room didn't. I had no idea why, until the third night. On the third night, I was woken up by a light in the hallway from the door of our room being open. The light was faint since it was way down the hall. I was on the bottom bed of the left bunk facing the door, and my friend was on the top bed of the opposite bunk. One of the people in our room left the door open when they went out. The other one was asleep. My friend was also awake, I just didn't know it. When I woke up, I automatically put on my glasses and was looking around until I saw the coat rack in the corner move. The coat rack had our coats on it, and next to it was a chest drawer. Someone was in the coat but on top of the chest. I will always remember this. I was a little boy, smaller than me. He was white, with short hair, and I didn't even see him wear any clothes. He wasn't naked, but I could only see the silhouette of his body. His hands were up, covering his face. He was crouched in a frog position, almost on top of the chest. I was stuck there just staring at this kid I've never seen before. I said nothing. Here's the bad part. He lowered his hands and revealed his face. He was staring at me with a huge smile. His eyes were huge. He kept staring, but slowly he was moving off the chest closer. I was stuck, and my friend this whole time was seeing what was happening. He was also frozen. Then suddenly, my guy Jason, the guy from the washroom, came back running down the hall and slammed the door shut. Me and my friend were suddenly out of our trance and got up instantly and flinged out our flashlights, pointing to the corner. The kid was gone. I explained why I pointed my flashlight to the corner, and then he explained. We both saw the same thing, and to this day, We still talk about it sometimes. Thank God there wasn't a fortnight. We didn't explain to Jason the story because he was an ELL student, and the other guy was an annoying person we didn't like. I remember the whole thing so vividly. It's crazy how we both saw it. When I got home, I told my family what happened, and I began my research if anything happened at that camp. I didn't find anything. My sister and I were driving home around midnight after my mother's flight from Montreal to my province was cancelled. Both of us were extremely tired and angry because of the situation, so that may have played a part on the attachment, but I digress. On the road leading into town, there's a bridge that overlooks a large wooded area by a river. Sitting on the edge of a bridge was what looked like a man dressed in all grey. We couldn't see his face or make out any features because it was dark and we were driving over 110 kilometers an hour. For a moment, we were stunned, and I asked my sister if I should call the police because it could have been somebody in trouble or somebody who was considering jumping off the bridge. We decided to let the police officer know via non-emergency, but nothing has come of it. Anyway, I just woke up from a disturbing dream and I know it's a bad omen, or something worse. In the dream, I came home to our 2 cats who passed away recently, sitting in our kitchen. We knew something wasn't right, but we decided to try and pet them. The female cat growled and hissed at me, trying to bite me as I got close. That's abnormal, because she was extremely affectionate and gentle. It's foggy as to how we came to this conclusion in the dream, but we wound up trying to do an exorcism after realizing they weren't our cats, but demons taking their forms. In the middle of the exorcism, they transformed into wild dogs, biting and snarling as we chanted in an attempt to banish them. Near the end, somehow, the exorcism failed and the dogs escaped the room. And that was the end of the dream. I'm a deeply religious person, and I've never had a dream like this before. I've had silly nonsense nightmares and auditory visual hallucinations my whole life that I know were fake. They've never really upset me after the fact, but this was different. This happened around late 2020, or possibly early 2021. I can't say the exact date, but I do know it was during the winter, as snow was out. Sometime during a span of a week, my cat began to wake me up nightly to feed her during the very early hours, between 2 and 3 a.m. This became a nightly occurrence where I would awake to find my cat staring at me beside my bed. This would prompt me to get up and follow her down the hallway, down the back stairs, and into the kitchen to feed her. On the night in question, she again was sitting at the side of my bed looking up at me. And again, like the previous nights, I followed her down the stairs and into the kitchen to feed her. I remember vividly petting her and kissing her atop her head, while she purred before pouring her the food. Then I turned and went back upstairs as I had done nights before. Once I reached the top of the steps, I paused for a moment, not sure why, but I listened and could hear the very audible sound of her food rolling around her cat bowl as she ate. I then walked through the hallway and re-entered my bedroom. For some reason, tonight I felt very tired and a little annoyed and irritated. I remember thinking to myself and saying in my head, "This is getting ridiculous," or something to that effect. And it was ridiculous. I was waking every night to feed her, which is something we'd never done before. Anyways, as I plopped onto my bed in a sitting position, I let out a large sigh in frustration, and immediately I heard something rustling. It was coming from a box I'd left in the corner of my bedroom because my cat enjoys sleeping in boxes. Well, I hear that rustling and see the box begin to shake. Seeing this, my body ran cold because I thought a mouse was in there and was going to pop out. Instead, out comes my cat, the very same cat I had just fed moments ago. She looked as though she'd been sleeping an extremely long time. You know how when you look at an animal that's just awoken, how they have that sleepy face look? Well, that's how she looked. And as she came out of the box, she yawned and did a long stretch before walking past me with her tail up, glancing at me, and then walking right back out the door. It was as if me coming into the room and letting out a loud sigh had roused her from her slumber. Now, I sat there stunned for a few moments. Honestly, my head could not comprehend what just occurred, because for my cat to be inside the box and asleep was impossible. I had just gone down the stairs to feed her, and once I went back up the stairs, I could hear her eating her food. The entire walk from the kitchen back to my bedroom is roughly a 30-second walk, maybe 40 seconds if I'm being sluggish. But that's nowhere near enough time for her to have gotten back into my bedroom, into that box, and fallen back asleep. I need to mention, however, that there are 2 staircases in my home. But even if she went up the second stairwell, it would make zero difference because I heard her clearly eating while I was up the top step and in the hallway to my bedroom. Not to mention, for her to go up the front stairwell and beat me into my bedroom, she would have to be running full speed through the living room, past the dining room, and into the front hallway before dashing up the front stairwell. Had she done all that, I would have most certainly heard the sound of her running up the front stairs in a mad dash, which didn't happen. There are 2 important points I want to make. While I was in the kitchen, I physically touched my cat. And second, when she came out of her box in my bedroom, it was 100% her. I mean, it looked exactly as she does, because it was my cat. I have 3 thoughts on what happened. All, in my opinion, are horrible, but I want to hear others' thoughts. My thoughts go as follows. A. The cat I went down to feed was not my cat, but something else entirely, or my memory is altered. B. My cat somehow managed to be in 2 places at once, doing 2 separate things. And lastly, C. Sometime after I turned away from my cat in the kitchen to the top of the stairwell, I'm missing time, i.e., something happened to me. A and C are the more concerning thoughts I have, but they may be most likely what happened. My cat never before woke me up during those hours. She's always had a set schedule, and like most pets, she knows the times I feed her, and it's never during those hours. After this happened, I went downstairs because I felt extremely uncomfortable in my room, and I began sleeping down there nearly an entire year. It's only now that I'm back in my bedroom. The day after it happened as well, my cat never woke me up again to feed her, and it hasn't happened since. It only happened during those 7 days, and never again. This happened a few years ago. When I was in my early days of my career and joined an internship in a small town, a few of us were housed by the company we worked for in a modified apartment. They had basically joined 2 apartments together, so there were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on each side, with a long corridor in between. Towards the end of the assignment, we had a group presentation, so the bunch of us living on our side, we worked on the presentation together, decided to head very early into the office and practice. As per our plans made the previous evening, me and this girl called Simna woke up first around 4:30 a.m, so we could use the 2 bathrooms each and get ready. I didn't mind using the bathroom at the other end of the corridor, so I collected my toiletries and headed that way. Simna was doing the same on our side, and we didn't really talk as it was too early and others were sleeping. The 2 bedrooms on the other side were empty, and one was closed. I assumed they were sleeping. I set my stuff on the counter and realised I forgot my bath towel, so came out of the bathroom and saw Simna standing in the middle of the darkened corridor with her back to me. I halted immediately. Something seemed very off with the way she was standing. The hair on my arms was rising, and a warning bell went off in my head. I must have made some sound because this person turned their head around to look at me. I looked exactly like her, but she was smiling broadly at me, like really smirking. I quickly said, "Hey, what's going on?" to her, but at the same time backed up into the bathroom where there was light and hot water to use as a weapon. I didn't dare to come out and started praying. After around 20 minutes' time, I heard knocking on the bathroom door and my roommate's, not Simna's, voice asking me if I was done. I didn't say anything to her. I couldn't understand it myself. But as I walked down the corridor to my room, I saw Simna getting ready in her room. I went to her and was like, "What the hell, dude? You scared me." And she did not know what I was talking about. I didn't know this girl very well, but she wasn't a prankster. Also, it was too early in the morning and we were too geared up about the presentation for her to do something like that and pretend like nothing happened. Till the end of that internship, she maintained it wasn't her that scared me. To this day, I cannot explain what or who I saw that day. My little sister, 6, has been suddenly incredibly awfully behaved. Violent, malicious, enjoying upsetting people, etc. for the past few weeks, despite never being like that. And for ages we've been patient and trying to just get her through it. Her school said there's nothing concerning her behaviour there, and outside of the house she's 100% good as gold, normal shit. But as soon as she steps into the house, not good. Tonight, as my brother, 24, put her to bed, a weird German 1957 book literally just appeared in her wardrobe. Like, we've never owned anything like this. We aren't Christian or intrigued by Christianity, but this book depicting and worshipping Mary literally just appeared in the kid's room. He literally ran down to show us in terror. 24 years old, non-religious, non-superstitious. My mum is barely even superstitious and is completely terrified of the book and won't even look inside, even though the cover is blank and just displays the name of the book. She was on the verge of a panic attack, genuinely freaking out, and refused to look inside. I did a tarot reading for the book, and it was all bad. I'm talking 7 cards representing terror, deception, suffering, betrayal, loss, etc. My heart dropped to my chest with dread that was worse than when I first looked inside of the book. I've done my best to cleanse it, but it still doesn't feel completely right. We're all scared as fuck for my little sister, who happened to have this in her room. Especially because for the past few weeks she's been good as gold everywhere, until we get inside our house, in which she's suddenly violent and malicious, and visibly enjoys hurting others. Which is nothing like her at all. She's only 6, but grins while trying to make you cry in genuinely horrible ways. She's a lovely, intelligent kid, and we've been concerned for a while. But seeing this made us all feel a terrible, dreadful fear. After removing this book from her room, she was all cuddly and nice and went to bed. We have no idea what to do with the book. Burning it or throwing it away is a no-go. We don't even know if anyone will want to buy it. Would it be wrong to give it away? We have no idea what to do. Her behaviour might not be linked. We truly hope my little sister is safe, but this book is not good shit. You know how in every family there are stories passed down through the generations? Some are short and funny. Others are cautionary tales told from experience. And some are really just long told jokes that people don't take seriously. But in some cases, it does well to remember that all stories have a grain of truth in them. And sometimes, what you think couldn't possibly be real, unfortunately, is. This is how I learned the hard way that I should be more open-minded about my family's stories. Meet the cast. Me. If you don't know, you don't have the clearance to know. D. My dad. G. My grandfather. GS. My grandfather's sister. GGM. My great-grandmother. G's mother. GGF. My great-grandfather. G's father. S1 and S2. My older and younger sister. Let's get spooky. Unlike a lot of people I know, I had the luck of growing up knowing my GGM. All my friends have great grandparents who either were already gone or had passed before they could remember. My GGM was healthy and loved to see her great grandbabies, so we got to visit often as children. Now, what you need to know is my GGM had a God fearing Baptist who, while open and tolerant to other ways of faith, held fast on her own. Her house was old fashioned in the way that it was set up. Her living room connected to the dining room and had these shutter doors that could open and close, making a wall between the rooms. I had seen my D and G close to them before, and due to being old, they were hard to move. She also had narrow hallways, and all of them led to a back staircase that went to the attic. Now the main story. So when I was about 8 years old, my dad had taken my sisters and I over to GBM's house to spend the afternoon. There wasn't much for 3 young girls to do, but we always tried to have fun. Near the end of our visit, I had to use the bathroom, so I went down the back hallway that didn't have any lights. The house didn't have any in the hall when it was built, and it was too narrow to put a lamp. When I was nearing the bathroom, I noticed one of the other doors was opened. It was my mom's sewing room. I'd never been in there before, so I poked my head in. On a chair, in the far corner, sat this doll that she made, one of those old Raggedy Ann dolls. I just stared at it for a moment before turning to go back to the hall, when I heard rustling and then a soft thud. My head snapped back, and the doll had fallen off the chair. Now keep in mind, I was 8 and easily spooked. So without hesitation, I abandoned plans for the bathroom and went back to the living room. I didn't say anything right then as I was too spooked. But as my dad was driving us back to our mom's, I brought up what happened. He didn't seem surprised at all. Is that all? That's nothing. Do you know what happened in that house when your Gramps was a teenager? Me? No. S1. What happened? S2. Geez, how long ago was this? If Gramps was still a kid? D. When G was 16, he came home to GGM having a panic attack. Apparently, GGM had come home from getting groceries, and GS had a friend over. They had gotten their hands on a Ouija board and were using one of the good glasses to talk to the spirits. Of course, your GGM was furious, and after a lecture told GS to walk her friend home. After they left, GGM took the board and glass. She put the glass back in the cabinet and took the Ouija board back to the attic. She had planned on having GGF throw it out later. When she came back to the living room to get the groceries, she found the Ouija board and glass back on the coffee table. Then she heard footsteps and movement all over the house. But what was worse was the sliding shutter doors closing and opening by themselves. She just stood there until G walked in. She had the pastor at her church come in to cleanse the house, but sometimes things still happen. She's learned to live with it. S1, isn't she scared? Nope, says her faith in God protects her. And you know what? Nothing has ever hurt her. Now, as an 8-year-old, I found that story just a bit too unbelievable. I believed in ghosts and everything, but family had a way of blowing things out of proportion, especially through stories. So I shrugged off the odd experience and forgot all about it until I was 13. I had been to my GGM's house a few times since I was 8, but nothing ever happened. I felt like I was being watched, but my sisters always told me that I was just paranoid, so I didn't think much of the feeling. When I was 13, we visited once again, and while sitting in the living room having some snacks, something unthinkable happened. The sliding doors slid shut quickly. My sisters and I jumped. My D looked only startled, but GGM didn't bat an eye. The doors then slid open and shut again twice, before stopping entirely. S2 looked ready to cry, while S1 was about to run outside. Me? I was too shaken to move. I was having trouble understanding what I just saw. The feeling I was being watched was back again, like eyes were right behind my head. I didn't dare turn to look. Instead, I looked at GGM and she just smiled at us. Don't be scared, girls. Nothing's gonna happen. It just gets miffed when ignored, and I haven't been paying any mind to it for months. Looking back now at 26, that day still spooks me. I'm an atheist, and I'm not sure if it was God looking out for my GGM, or if she was just that badass herself and whatever was in her house left her alone because of it. My GGM lived the rest of her days in that house. It was partially destroyed from a tornado when I was 15, but we fixed it and the strange happenings pretty much stopped after. My GGM died on a Sunday evening when I was 19 after battling cancer. She was 92. At our family gatherings, there were always jokes and stories about our lives, but I now pay closer attention to the older stories told. Because now, I know that even the odd ones could easily be true. Meet the cast. Me. If you don't know what that means, you obviously don't have the clearance to know. S1, my older sister. S2, my younger sister. M, my mom. SD, my stepdad. When I was 14, I lived in a 2-story house with my mom, sisters, stepdad, 2 dogs, and occasionally my SD's kids. It was a pretty nice house with plenty of room for everyone. You walk in the door and there's a small wooden landing. Then there's a set of carpeted stairs going up and one set that goes down. Downstairs is a small bedroom. A large den M and SD converted into a bedroom. A small bathroom and our laundry room that leads into the garage. The laundry room also holds our home's heater. Upstairs are 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, the living room, the dining room, and the kitchen. Now the house isn't ancient, but it's a pretty old house. We had lived there for about 3 years, and were used to random noises like the house settling at night or once when a squirrel got into the wall. But then something happened that changed everything. One Saturday, my sisters and I were chilling in the living room in front of our TV. S1 and I had claimed the couch that sat against the small wall to the stairs, while S2 claimed the love seat. M and SD were in the kitchen cooking, and everything was pretty quiet. Then we heard it suddenly. Thump, 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 clack, clack, thump, 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 thump. My S1 and I looked at each other for just a second before we screamed and jumped off the couch. She ran into the kitchen, and I backed up from the stairs until my back hit the opposite wall. M and SD come into the living room with S1 trailing behind. M, what's with the screaming? S1, pointing to the stairs. Something just ran up the stairs. Me, nodding. I felt it too. It was right behind us. SD and M looked at each other before sighing. SD, it was just the heater kicking on downstairs. You know it makes noises when it turns on. Me, this didn't sound anything like the heater. I heard whatever it was on the carpet, then on the wood, and then the carpet again. They just kept playing it off as the heater, but my sisters and I knew differently. It wasn't until a couple of years later, after we moved out of the house, did my mom tell us the truth. The lady who rented us the house had lost her husband there. He had died from a heart attack in what was S2's bedroom. The lady had cautioned M and SD when they signed the rental papers about it, and how there would be some odd things happening, but not to be alarmed. I don't think it was an old man running up the stairs. It sounded more like a 300-pound man sprinting up them. It still spooks me to this day. This is mainly a summary of ghostly encounters the females of my family have gone through. And these encounters have been going on for decades, and normally come in the form of full body spirits. The women on both sides of my family have always been spiritual and like magnets to the supernatural. My mum, my dad's mother. My mum had an older brother that passed on too early in life. My great uncle Robert had only been in his 40s when he died. I never learned the reason, but it was a couple years later that while she sat in her room sewing, my mom heard someone in the hallway. Now, that wasn't a big deal, as back then my dad was a young teen and constantly had friends over. My mom had an open door policy, so neighborhood kids would randomly be in the house. The footsteps came to a stop in front of a door. She glanced up and then looked back to her sewing after absent-mindedly saying, "Hey, Bobby." The steps went on and faded away. It took a few minutes before her head snapped up and she ran to her door. She looked up and down the hall, but there was no one there. No one else was even in the house. She often tells me how for the longest time she thought she'd been crazy because her brother had looked so real, as if he had just come to stop by after work to say hi. While it made her sad at the time, being reminded that he was gone, she was also happy to know that her brother still stopped by to see her. My grandma Ginny, my mom's mother. So my grandma Ginny has just recently lost her second husband John to a heart attack as he slept. She was unfortunate to find him in the morning, not long after he passed. It almost traumatized her and broke her heart. Not even a month after his death, she was sweeping the living room when behind her she heard Ginny clear as day. She turned around and there was John standing by the hallway. He didn't say anything more before he vanished. My grandma screamed and fainted. She didn't see him again, but until she moved from the house, she often felt someone watching her. My mom has always been a magnet for spirits. She claims it was due to a lot of death being around her as a child and teenager. A lot of her older family passed when she was young, and as a teen, 5 of her friends met with untimely, often tragic deaths. Personally, I think she's just one of those people that are more in tune with spirits. But she often has experiences when she goes to places with a history of paranormal occurrences. She's been pushed, had her hair pulled up, and has had her things moved. But the biggest event happened about 6 years after we lost her dad, my grandpa. She'd been sleeping, but was woken up by something nudging her shoulder. When she opened her eyes, she swears she saw her dad. But when she blinked, she vanished. They had a close relationship, and while some people would claim she just imagined it because she missed him, I think otherwise. While I have not seen a spirit, I have had weird happenings around me. More so, I believe I can sense that someone is there, but I can't see them. One instance was just a year after we lost my grandpa, my mom's dad, and my grandma Ginny's first husband, and I was visiting Sandy, my grandpa's second wife, when I went to the kitchen for a drink. It was a rough time in my family due to financial burdens and some health scares for my mom. I was so sad and depressed. I was only 15, and I felt a sob working its way up my throat. But as I took a deep breath through my nose to try and calm down, I smelled something that had been absent from the house for months. Black coffee and pipe tobacco. It was what my grandpa had constantly smelled like. My grandma drank a different kind of coffee and never straight black, and she didn't smoke. My grandpa only drank straight black coffee and smoked on an old-fashioned pipe with a special blend of tobacco. I looked around and saw nothing, but I could feel he was there, and just the thought made me feel a bit better. So recently I went on a 5-day vacation out in SoCal to visit my mom and younger sister. My mom is very sensitive to spirits and has come in contact with a fair few over her life. Her biggest belief is that her dad, my grandpa who passed away 12 years ago now, is always nearby to keep an eye on her. For a while, I thought maybe this was just how she copes with the loss of her dad, who she loved very much. But some things can't be ignored. And there have been other events that had me thinking she might have been right. This is one of those times. It was my 3rd night there, and we 3 and the dog were just winding down in the living room after dinner. My sister was in the middle of telling Mom about her day at work when I looked towards the TV. Now, the TV sits at the wall at the base of the stairs. I had just flicked my eyes away for just a moment, and I saw movement up at the top of the stairs. I don't know exactly what I saw. It was basically a shadow that looked like a person. It didn't do anything for a second, but then it sped away towards the right, to my mom's room. I just sat there, not blinking or breathing, in shock. Despite my curiosity about the supernatural, I've yet to actually see a ghost. Sure, I've heard things, I've seen things move, but never have I seen a ghost. Until now. My mom and sister eventually noticed my staring and asked what's wrong. I didn't know how to explain it and just blurted out, "You don't see anything up there, right?" They just looked confused. After explaining the best I could, my mom tells me not to worry. She too sees the shadow sometimes, but she's not afraid. It's never harmed or scared her. She genuinely believes it's Grandpa, just hanging around to keep an eye on the family. I just hope she's right. It happened to my sister, who at the time was 13. Now, it's important to the story that I mention I'm the only boy in my family. So the cast will be M, Mom, J, 13-year-old sister, D, 11-year-old sister, S, recently born baby sister, and I was 5 when this happened, and I'm the 5th child. Okay, so when I was 5, my family and I had just moved into a new house with my then stepfather. The layout of the house was as follows. The front door immediately brought you to a hallway. On the left side of the hallway was the living room, which, by the way, we had just got the wooden floors buffed and polished. To the right of the hallway was a door that led you to what used to be the garage, but the people who had owned the house before us had turned it into 2 separate rooms that had a bathroom. Straight down the hallway, you could easily see the dining room. Next to the dining room was mine and my other sister's room that we shared, and the kitchen was on the other side. Next to the kitchen was my stepfather's and mom's room, and further down from my room was my sister Dee's room. In the dining room, there was a sliding glass door with a screen door that led to the back patio. We always kept it locked because my mom was very paranoid. It should also be mentioned that at the time, we didn't really have a computer room, so we decided to just leave the laptop that my sister Jay owned on top of the dining room table. This particular night, my sisters Jay and Dee decided to watch movies on the big screen TV. Back then, in 2005, that was like a movie theatre screen. Sometime during the night, they ended up falling asleep. Now, my sister Jay woke up feeling weird because she felt like she woke up for no reason. So she looks at her flip phone to see that the time was roughly 1 o'clock in the morning. Seeing the time, she tries to go back to sleep, but for some reason, she just can't. Then, when it started to get closer to 2 in the morning, that's when it began. Jay started to hear tapping on the screen of the sliding door. My sister thought nothing of it, seeing as how we moved from the Bronx to Florida, and we had heard that Florida was known for its raccoons. Then she heard the glass door open and close. Then, the banging began. My sister said it sounded like someone had broken into the house and started messing with the cabinets, kind of like slamming them closed repeatedly. Then, a tapping noise occurred as if someone was typing on the keyboard of the laptop. It continued like that for the next 10 to 15 minutes, just constant banging on the cabinets and tapping of the keyboards. Now, you remember how I said my little sister had just been born? Well, she was a relatively quiet baby. She never really cried in the middle of the night. She usually always slept soundly through the night. Though on this night, baby S starts to whine like if someone is messing with her. She only whines for about a minute when a knocking on the kitchen table is heard. It sounds like when a parent is on the phone and wants to get your attention without saying your name out loud. Then, my baby sister stops crying almost instantly. A couple more taps on the keyboard, and then finally the noise stops. My sister Jay finally gets the courage to get up and tries to make a run for it to my mom's room. She wraps her blanket around her and starts to run, but trips due to the newly done floorboards and scrapes her knee badly. She finally makes it to my mom's room and wakes her up and tells her everything that she heard. Naturally, my mom and stepfather think someone has broken into the house, so they check it out. All of the cabinets are open, the laptop is open but not on, and has never been on, and the sliding glass door is securely locked as always. But the screen door has 2 medium-sized scratches going down the middle. My mom wakes me up, and the rest of my sisters, and we all end up sleeping in the living room together. We continued to sleep like that for about 2 more months of staying in that house. And this was just the beginning of weird occurrences. I think it would only be fair to let y'all know a little bit more about me. I was the only boy out of 6 kids. We each have different fathers. Also, it's important to say I was born and raised, for the most part, in the Bronx. My family and I would move between New York and Florida constantly for various reasons, with the exception of staying in Georgia. For a good chunk of my life, my father wasn't in my life. From the ages of 5 to 11 years old, I didn't know where my father was. However, unlike most absent fathers, my pop actually was looking for me. Also, my mom wasn't the type to keep up from my pop. It was just with the constant moving and her constantly changing her phone numbers. Essentially, connections were lost due to miscommunication. And the last known place we knew he was back in the Bronx. But when we looked for him, it was like he just picked up and left. Well, needless to say, my pop's family found me when I was 11. He was living in Arizona with his wife and her kids. He came back to New York to visit me during the beginning of the summer, and we decided together that I should spend the rest of the summer with him in Arizona. And that's where the story begins. My pops lived in an area that was basically a desert/neighborhood. For miles, there was sand and little forest-like areas that surrounded the neighborhood, and a river that was close by. My pop had 2 dogs that me and my older stepbrother would walk every day. Well, one day, around sunset, me and my stepbro, we'll call him Ty, decided to walk the dogs in the forest that was next to the river. And that's when Ty told me the urban legend of La Llorona. If you're Hispanic, or if you've seen the movie, then you know her tale. But if you don't well, she drowns her kids and is damned to find them in the afterlife. And if she finds you, she'll drown you too. Well, 11-year-old me did not know. Ty tells me the story, and not gonna lie, I was shocked. But I've always been good at not showcasing my thoughts or feelings on my face. So I played it cool and told him the story wasn't crazy. We got home, eat dinner, and get ready to sleep. Me and Ty go into his room, because he was sharing his room with me for the summer. His room was pretty big for a 12-year-old, and he had 2 twin-sized beds for sleepovers. In his room, he had really big windows that looked out into the forest by the house. Ty knocks out instantly, and I'm laying on the bed on the floor directly under the big windows. I started drifting off into a light sleep. Later on, I kept hearing sniffling, but I thought it was Ty. I was wrong, because a few seconds later, I hear crying, and already, I'm like, oh nah, I'ma head out. But I feel like I'm stuck in my bed with fear. I kept hearing the crying and sniffling, and it didn't sound distant. At this point, I get up to try to wake up Ty. I lightly tapped his shoulder to get his attention, but he's a very deep sleeper, so it was a challenge to get him up. For some reason, as I'm tapping his shoulder, I look to the window to see a silhouette of a woman standing in between my pop's house and the edge of the forest, and she was staring at me. I said nah, and ran back to the end of the floor and put the covers over me. If I'ma die while asleep. The next morning, I asked Ty if he heard crying. He said no. And I left it at that, and didn't look out the window for the rest of the summer. This story takes place in the many years I've lived in the Bronx. Around this time, I was about 9 or 10 years old. My little sister S was maybe about 4 or 5 years old, and I had a best friend. We'll call her Lee. It's important to the story that you guys know that my family has always been tight-knit. So the living situation during the time of this story goes as such. My little sister Simone, big sisters Devon and Chris, my mother, and myself lived in apartment 1. My older sister Jamie had her then fiancé and 7-month-old baby lived directly across the hallway in apartment number 2. Me, Lee, and my little sister were all very close. Even though Lee and I were 4 or 5 years older than Simone, We did almost everything together. We pretended we were in a band, made up funny games, watched classic cartoons like Ed, Ed and Eddie, Camp Laszlo, Bill and Mandy, watched all the Disney Channel classics, etc. And it didn't matter what apartment we did those activities in. Jamie and her fiance would let us kids run in and out of their apartments whenever we wanted, so we would always be running back and forth between the two apartments. The reason for this was because the building my family lived in was what used to be the basement, but was turned into two separate apartments, with the main door into the then basement being essentially the front door. We always had that front door locked 24/7, and we'd keep the two apartment doors unlocked and open during the day, since we were the only people living in that part of the building. On a day that was like any other day, with the sun shining and me, Lee and Simone watching R&B music videos, pretending we were our favourite singers in Jamie's apartment, with the apartment door wide open, in case we decided to go to my mom's apartment. It's important to also say we were the only ones home, like legit, the only people in the basement apartments. Jamie was with my mom and her fiance and son at an appointment. Devon and Chris were out with friends and said they'd be back much later in the day. It wasn't unusual for Lee and Simone to be at home by ourselves. It happened often, but what was unusual was what happened that day. As I mentioned before, Lee, Simone and I were trying to do the Kiss Kiss choreography from Chris Brown's new music video in the living room, which had a very good view of the apartment door that led to the hallway. During our sad attempts at trying to be sea breezy, it felt like it kind of wasn't only us in the apartment or basement. I brushed it off though, because sometimes I feel like I'm sometimes not alone, even when I should be. So I said nothing and continued to try and learn the dance. Eventually, we ended up watching the first live-action Alvin and the Chipmunks movie when Lee said, "Guys, I don't want to say nothing, but doesn't it feel like someone is here with us?" We were still in the living room, sitting on the couch with the apartment door wide open. With her saying that, automatically, Simone started to freak out as any 4-year-old would. In my attempt to calm her down, I turned to her. But instead of focusing my attention on my scared little sister, something else caught my eye. Something that to this day I can see vividly in my mind. Standing between the crack of the doorway and where the hinges met the wall, a tall, dark figure that had a masculine frame stood. It seemed like a person made entirely out of wisps of gas and the darkest shadows in the world, all combined into one. The most striking thing about this gas figure was the one eye that was peeking through the crack of the door looking back at me. I looked back to my little sister as calmly as a 9-year-old who had just seen something look back at them through a door when there was supposed to be no one else home could, and said, "It's okay, Simone, just watch the movie. Jamie and Mommy, should be back soon." I look over to Lee and mouth to her what I saw, since she couldn't see the door where she was sitting. She understandably turns pale. I mouth to her not to freak out, to stay put and pretend that everything is normal. I don't know why that was my course of action to take. I guess because whatever that thing was standing at the door, was blocking the only exit to safety. Since we lived in what used to be a basement, all the windows were pretty high up and hard to open. So we sat there for what felt like hours. Periodically, I'd look back to find figures still standing at us not moving, unflinching even when it was spotted. I made sure Simone never turned around or got up from the couch. It seemed like an eternity, until I heard my mom's house keys jingle in the front door. I booked it for my mom to meet her in the hallway, noticing that the figure was nowhere to be seen. I tried to play it cool like I was just excited to see her, so she wouldn't be worried. And I made sure that Lee said nothing to my mom either. Simone had already forgotten about what Lee had said earlier, so she said nothing to our mom either. But something has always stuck in my mind though. The door of the building was definitely locked, so it couldn't have been a person.